Right, so we are here in week 5 of the semester. Right, this is week 5. We are sort of almost in the halfway mark. We have covered the major theories. We have gone into the biological and the cognitive aspects. And each of those chapters have their theories on their own. Right? Later on today, we will see a debate and hear arguments on both sides of it. We are now moving into the social aspect of gerontology. Right? After the break week or the recess week, we will find that we will go into the more complex areas. Those areas encompasses knowledge and phenomena that transcend biological, cognitive, and social areas, right? Such as work environment, sleep problems, and informal caregiving. So I hope you know where we are at. And in terms of the assessment, you have already started on the participation. You have started on the flipped classroom. Today we will have a formal flipped classroom leadership by students. And we have also started on the journal writing, reflective journal writing. I will return you marked journals next week. After next week, in fact, in next week's session, where assessments are concerned, I will also cover the project, the group project, what I call the digital media advocacy project, that has two components, the media creation component as well as individual writing. So here is where we are at. I hope you are at a good pace with yourself. I read some of the journals, but a number of you have referred to our debates, especially the debate on Alzheimer's disease. It does seem to several of you that Alzheimer's disease and dementia in that context seem to be fairly either new to you or used not to be as devastating as you thought it to be. That is an area which many of us may not come into until we are in the later phase of our lives. When I was an undergraduate student, I wasn't really interested in that illness called dementia as opposed to mental illnesses like depression and anxiety disorders and mood disorders. So you would expect that as you go along, there will be other areas which may either shock you or surprise you where phenomena is concerned or where theory is concerned. I want to remind all of us in this course, one of the main approaches is this idea that theory predicts or controls phenomena, and that phenomenon when being investigated either supports or refutes a theory. I'd like you to remember this, right? As we move along, even if you do not go into research where this is research kind of thinking, you would want what you learn in this course to at least be applicable to what you observe in the various fields that geropsychology may be applicable, or just even in real life when you interact with other people. So here's where we are at. Now, are there any questions so far, clarification on what we have covered, where the course is before we move to dive into this chapter? Really, it's going to be a short chapter. No? Alright, good. Alright, so we'll move into this chapter. It's called Social Interrelations in Aging. We know that the social psychology of aging is very broad. Right? Marriage situation or marital context is but just one context. Right? As you know, social psychology has to do with how human beings interact both in person as well as in the context of other people. Right? It has to do with how other people, the presence or the perceived presence of other people affects or influences one person, as well as how one person affects or influences other people. We know that these other people could be outside, immediately outside of this person, say a family member, or it could be broader, say friends and relatives. It could be even broader to say the living community, and it could be even broader, right, to say the country or the ethnic group and it could even be broader than that. Right? So really today what you have read in the textbook is but just one area in social interrelations, and we call that older married couples or older marital dynamics. But that's the perspective, that's where we are set, that's the setting like, of today's talk. Really the topic in social interrelations is really broad, but we could take older married couples as a case, as these two authors of the textbook chapter have said, right? As a case to understand how different social relationships could influence aging and how aging could influence social interrelations. Right. So, brief background followed by the trends and research followed by macro level context and finally future directives. Not a very long lecture today. Right. I hope most of you have come across this diagram somewhere in developmental psychology or adolescent psychology or the like. This is taken from Bronfenbrenner, Uri Bronfenbrenner's social ecological theory. Right, and essentially posits the 5 systems here from micro to meso, exo, macro, and then chro. Right, I won't go in depth into this, but just like it to focus on the individual right in the middle of that. That is the older person we're talking about. So far we have discussed sex, right? We talk about age effect, cohort effect right inside. We talk about personality and health. Everything is so far kind of focused on the inside, the core. Purple circle. We are now starting to move into the yellow, the light yellow bit. Right? So where are we? We are at the family part. Bronfenbrenner will call this the micro system of any human individual. Right? In our context, it's the family of an older person, and specifically not just any family member, but the spouse. So either the wife or the husband. Right? If it is in the same sex marriage, then it will be the significant other. Right? So we are not even going beyond that yet, but we will, as you can see, using this diagram. We also talked about so far, at least very broadly, the chrono system. We said that look, age effects and cohort effects are different. Where aging is concerned, we need to be able to tell apart the two, or tell the difference between the two. And we know that it is not going to be easy task to uncover knowledge in those areas because of all the various methodological challenges. Right? So we'll touch on those a little bit. Okay. Why do we study married couples in aging research? 2 main reasons. One, that married couples predominantly share their life experiences. I mean, most of us know that they probably stay together, right? They probably live daily life together, share their, say, day-to-day activities, perhaps interests, hobbies, perhaps even work. It may be important to know each other in the course of some shared activity, like work or community relations and so on. So that's one reason, they share experiences. But so important is also the other reason, that these two people in the dyad are not biologically related. So they are not twins. They are not even brother and sister. They are not biologically related. So that means we could actually focus on the question of how much does shared experiences, i.e. nurture, or environmental factors in the context of a couple or dyad, influences that person and vice versa. Right? Think about the nature-nurture debate. This is really one type of research that aging researchers look at. Alright. Spouses share each other's aging outcomes. Is really this idea that well-being, health, and cognition outcomes, right? We have learned some of these outcomes already in previous lectures, right? Really seem to have high statistically significant correlations. One spouse. So if one person say rank high on quality of life, the other person, the spousal relation, tends to rank high for results. Right? So too is this, for instance, cognitive function. right? Visual spatial ability, verbal memory, for instance. Right? The textbook says this: recent time sampling research examining situation, person, and couple specific variability in affect and collaborative problem solving in older couples indicates that while the lion's share of variability was situation specific, about 15 to 20% of the variability originated at the level of the person, and another 7 to 20% of the variability was couple specific. So, layman terms, about 15% to 20% of whatever the health or well-being outcome due to individual. However, there is a significant 7 to 20% of that score on health or cognition or cognitive outcome is due to the couple. That's what the textbook says. Right? So this observation inevitably raises the question about possible underlying mechanisms. What is it about the couple, right, that allows sort of one person's score on, say, verbal memory to kind of influence the others? Well, they're not biologically related, it cannot be due to genetics. Right? So what is it? Is it communication? How we talk? Is it the degree, the nature of the relationship, i.e. the marital relationship? Right? Is it some specific situation that happened in a day-to-day life? Is it some context or some shared value that both ascribe to, for instance? These are what we call mechanisms or potential mechanisms that researchers will be interested in. Alright. Selective optimization with compensation, or the SOC framework, is what is written in the textbook. Really, it came from this author called Bob. Right, the question here is, how do spouses influence goal-relevant means? This SOC, right, is a guiding framework to discuss the mechanisms that may help older couples age successfully. So once again, the idea that older couples could age successfully could be due to several processes or mechanisms within this framework. Two of the main mechanisms are what we call the optimization mechanism and the compensation mechanism. According to this model, or this framework called the SOC model, social others, such as spouses, often play a pivotal role in the choice of goals and tasks, and also have a profound impact on the means to accomplish a chosen goal. How do they do that? They create a social context that strengthens individual resources and so leads to a situation where older adults can perform at their best and thrive. So, by just being together, by just being married, by just doing something, some shared experiences, allows any one of them to kind of optimize the health outcomes of the other. That's what the model suggests, i.e. the optimization process. This model also posits that where a person has a loss or a reduction in one's ability, that the other person or the significant other also allows new ways to perform that loss function. Right? Such as collaboration, such as helping, such as discussion. You will hear some of these terms later on in research. So, while on the one hand, it seems like we are now at a quite, what the textbook would say, quite an inspirational or quite inspiring kind of theory, where we can say 1 plus 1 is better than 2, right? Synergy, right? We hear this a lot in business, organizational development, organizational psychology, right? We hear this in team bonding, we hear this in team building, right? We hear things like that. But researchers also caution us, Bob Carstensen also cautioned us that not all endeavors are going to be successful because spouses do hamper each other's aging outcomes in certain areas which they have uncovered evidence for. Now, this is the original model. Right. So, what you read in the textbook, which I shared in the previous slide, right, is the parts of the model that's taken out by the textbook chapter writers. And they focus on the O and the C, compensation and optimization. But really, the original model that came from Box had S. And what is S? S is selection. So, three things in the original model: selection, optimization, compensation. Three things. Right? What is selection? Identification of goal domains and directionality of ontogenetic process. Narrowing of pool of potentiality. Right? That means two people being together by nature of their marital relationship would already pre-select certain contexts, certain situations that will occur. Example would be, say two rocket scientists marry each other, one man and one woman. You would expect that, right, there will be several, that their physical medium work environment will be other scientists. So this is a pre-selection. That's the idea here. You would expect that both have some shared interest or at least ability in scientific research. Scientists, right? So this is the selection. That's an example. So that's the original model. However, the textbook chapter writers focuses not on the S part, but on the O and the C. So this is the background. So this is the figure here. Move on. What do we have? One piece of research is that in real couples on the left, on the graph on the left, right, this is figure 14.1 in the textbook, we see that happiness in one member of the diet seems to be correlated with the other member of the diet. Right? So you could see that the line there's a linear relationship. Right? This is a scatter plot on the left. Okay, you understand that. These are real married couples. On the right graph, you see two individuals who are randomly paired. So they assess these individuals on several outcomes, cognitive health. And this study really is called the Seattle longitudinal study. Right? And they found that, well, it's almost flat, it's almost an horizontal line. That means no matter how one changes, no matter how one has a higher or lower score in some outcome measurement, that outcome measurement isn't really dependent on, doesn't really kind of co-vary with that randomly paired, with this other randomly paired individual. So this is one piece of strong evidence to suggest, right, that there really are, at least in three areas: health, cognition, well-being. In these three areas, we see the left, the trend on the left. So remember, this study is called the Seattle longitudinal study. Let's see. In the textbook, it says using up to 35 years of longitudinal happiness information from couples participating in the longitudinal study, these authors in the textbook have shown that spouses did not only report similar happiness at the beginning of the study, they also demonstrated that changes in happiness over time were associated between spouses as well. The textbook authors also found that these spousal interrelations were considerably larger in size than those found among randomly paired men and women. This means that adults married to a spouse whose happiness went up were more likely to also report higher happiness over time. So, when well-being is concerned, so now we're zooming into one of the areas called well-being. But spouses may draw on each other for self-affirmation or positive sentiment overall. Right? So, for self-affirmation, couples may bring love and acceptance to the partner. So, this line of work has been based on dating student couples. So, students who are dating, wtih, boy-girl relationship. It would be intriguing to examine if spousal self-affirmation operates as a mechanism through which older spouses boost each other's self-esteem and well-being. Positive sentiment override is yet another way to optimize. What does that mean? But in line with theoretical notions that older couples optimize the emotional climate within their relations, it has been shown that older couples display more positive affect, and that they also interpret their spouse's behaviors in more favorable ways than other middle-aged. So two processes here. Self-affirmation, the other spouse may affirm oneself. The other party, the spouse may affirm oneself. Or positive sentiment override. Right? That the other spouse could tend to have a more favorable regard. The other party may have a favorable regard to his or her spouse. So that's two ways of which optimization plays out in well-being research in older adults. How about compensation? We see another two mechanisms here: collaborations and unasked for or unsolicited support. Older adults increasingly face situations where they are in need of help to compensate for losses, resource losses, like men. Hence, in contrast to optimization, compensation could also help the other party. Right? It essentially offers new means to what is lost, to what could not have been achieved or done by this person who lost his or her certain resource. So it is the idea that two heads are better than one, if you call it that way. Right? One example is this: it has been shown that middle-aged and older adults who collaborate a lot with their spouse also report making better decisions when working together with their partner and enjoying their collaborations more than spouses who collaborate infrequently. So it seems that collaboration doesn't just work for the end goal, but also brings joy along and joy. Another example, this one about unsolicited support. But this topic called unasked for support, or this notion called unasked for support, has been shown to be associated with low affect quality in individuals. Right? Taken together, there is substantial evidence for spousal associations regarding levels and changes in well-being in old age. This is recovery. Despite some promising models from social psychological literature, aging research is only beginning to identify specific mechanisms through which spouses may optimize each other's well-being and compensate for resource loss. So we are now at this stage where compensation in terms of the collaboration process and the unasked for support process is still lacking in too much support, research. That's what the next book is saying. Okay, we move on to health. What are the various health indicators? Quality of life, functional limitation or functional ability, blood pressure, the various vital signs, right? And various health behaviors like health-seeking behaviors, going to a doctor when you need to see one, for instance, medication adherence, we discussed that last lecture. Right? These are various indicators of health. Now, what influences these indicators? Using the SOC model, we see that ways to optimize, once again, processes or what we call optimization processes, does seem to improve or does seem to either improve or decrease indicators. So, for instance, diet planning. So, planning one's day-to-day, say, health behavior, say, going to a day rehabilitation center for a person with stroke, doing that together, having a spouse accompany, it does seem to increase, right, the exercise level or the physical activity level, right, of the person who needs to rehab, say after a stroke. So dyadic planning to do it together, or what researchers call spousal support. This could be in several areas, they say emotional support, instrumental or practical support, mental support, right? Does help the other party who say need to increase his everyday physical activity do so for several other reasons. Say for instance, needs to reduce bad cholesterol. Physical health is another area that seems to optimize well-being, the health of the other. Right? Physical health reduces stress and cortisol association. So we know from health psychology that when a person perceives stress, right, physiologically cortisol is formed. Cortisol we know is not so good for, right, physiological responses. So there is already a relationship. Stress or perceived stress is tied to cortisol production. So now what we are saying is physical touch buffers that. The more physical touch, the less stress gives rise to kind of an automatic or quick response as in the cortisol production response. So that's what it's saying here. Now compensation. Combination of traits linked to adverse health outcomes are beneficial if these are found in the spouse. What do we mean by that? Example here. For instance, wives whose husbands were characterized as a person of high conscientiousness. Remember our personality traits? Ocean, the big part. Conscientiousness is one. So if you're high on C, combined with high on N, neuroticism. Right? Now, wives whose husbands are characterized as such report better health than other women. Probably because these men were vigilant and diligent regarding health-related issues, both for themselves and for their wives. This is one piece of research. Another piece. Higher neuroticism, that is high N, in one spouse has been is found to be linked to more favorable everyday problem-effect association. So, problem on the one hand, effect or feeling on the other, the relationship. Right? So high N in the spouse is linked to a stronger association between the problem and the mood or the feeling about it. Possibly because spouses higher in neuroticism are more vigilant and prepare their partners to deal with everyday stressors, thereby compensating for aging-related losses. So once again, if you remember the knowledge regarding personality and health, this is really one area about conscientiousness and neuroticism. Okay, cognition. What are the cognitive indicators? Memory, various types of memory, inductive reasoning, perceptual speed, and cognitive complexity. Now, obviously, these are not the only indicators, but research has used these indicators up to now, up to this time when we're speaking, research has found evidence of using these. So when optimization is concerned, we see that spouses may be able to optimize cognitive performance by creating a positive emotional climate and by counteracting the bad or the adverse effects of anxiety-provoking stereotypes that tend to undermine an older adult's cognitive performance in various tasks. That's one piece of research we know. Where compensation is concerned, older adults may be able to compensate age-normative cognitive losses by engaging in collaboration, what the authors call spousal collaboration. One factor that has been shown to facilitate collaborative gains is what we call dyadic communication, and familiarity. When these two people in the dyad communicate and are familiar with each other's peculiarities, likes and dislikes, interests, tendency to do certain things in certain situations, it does seem, right, that just this collaboration alone, whether no matter how we measure it, whether by observable behavior or not so observable behavior, they seem to compensate for the cognitive losses that are associated with age. That's what has been found. Let's see what example we have. Okay, one group of researchers in a textbook, Roberts et al. 2011. Right? They have shown that older adults who collaborated with their spouses needed fewer cues, or you can say fewer help, to guess a specific object than older adults who collaborated with age-matched but unfamiliar partners. Familiar partner, unfamiliar partner, same age or similar. Right? The first group tend to do better without help. That's what I say. That's what research found. Right? Whether the opposite might also be true remains to be tested. So, the above were three areas: well-being, health and cognition outcomes that we see in older adults where marital relationship, where this context of marriage kind of makes a difference. Now we're going into the macro level as proceeded by Wolfram. Two things here: birth cohort and cultures / religious denominations. Right. In research, we see that there are profound differences between generations in the likelihood to disengage from unsatisfying marriages, i.e., separation or divorce, as manifested in increasing divorce rates in the United States. So that's the first point there. I wrote Viagra, that's another one. One example about both cohort is how it's linked to, in this case, right, the drug called Viagra, or what we call sexuality or sexual function enhancing drugs. So it is no longer just Viagra now, but about 25 years ago, I think we started to have Viagra, followed by Challenge, and a host of many other drugs thereafter. Right? It is in that same cohort that research found that changes in sexuality is related to the introduction of Viagra. So before the introduction of Viagra, researchers found, right, that spouses tend to have a certain level of sexuality. So they have questions on behaviors, they did different research, observation, self-report. After the introduction of Viagra, what they found was kind of two extremes: an increase and a decrease. However, this introduction of Viagra at those times, about 20 years ago, may only affect people who want to consume, who are exposed to such drugs then. So for older adults who lived before that means who probably are in the very late stage of it, we do not see this phenomenon. Because they are not born, they don't belong to the birth cohort that comes with or after the introduction of the Viagra, of this drug, sexual performance enhancing drugs. Right? Okay. Where cultures are concerned, we see in research that different social norms and expectations between individuals belonging to the same birth cohort. So what do we mean? That means in the same cohort, right? In the same, say in the, take any year, say the year 1945. Let's say that the generation that was born between 45 to 50, right? The near post-war era. So they kind of like the same years or same birth cohort. Now, if you kind of segment them according to, say, religious denominations, or even religions, or religious, what we see is that they tend to have a different pattern of behaviors. Yeah. And if you go back once again to the diagram of Wolfram Brenner's social ecological theory, you see that subcultures and regions or religious denominations go under the macro. So what we are saying is, much as the context of spousal relationship or older adult marriages do form salient do have salient predictive power over phenomenon in aging, this spousal relationship is also subject to this bigger context of the macro context. And research has found this relationship, right, in two areas, two types or two kinds of macro context: the birth cohort as well as the religious/culture. Alright, we now move into future directions and challenges. First, timescale. It is well known that there is a need to link or associate developmental processes that occur at different levels of abstraction and along different time scales. So once again, one convenient social ecological theory, right, you see that an individual, right, may say require 3 times a week rehabilitation. Let's say the person has a stroke, right? So we would measure his or her functional ability, say by week. Right? But there would be other phenomena that could not be measured by week because the variation would not show itself so quickly. To measure them by month. For instance, let's say cognitive decline, MCI, non-cognitive decline. So then we need to measure them by months. The thing is, what changes over the span of weeks may affect what changes over the span of months, right? And what happens, or what those changes that happen in the span of months may affect changes that happen over the span of years, say tendency to disengage from the marriage, right? i.e. divorce or say separation. Now, how is research going to achieve measurement of all these and put them together? Obviously, we need to do longitudinal design research. The thing is, who remembers the type of longitudinal design? Where we measure several time points that are very close together, then we have kind of a longer span, and then a smaller, very quick succession time. We discussed that in the first lecture. So it's not just longitudinal where we say measure every month for 5 years. That's simple longitudinal. Or measure every week for 1 year. That's longitudinal, right? In fact, measure every week for 1 month. That's also longitudinal. Or we are saying, look, measure every week for the first, say, 8 weeks. And then wait 6 months later, the first 6 weeks from the 7th month, we do that again. And then the first 6 weeks in the 1 year period, the first 6 weeks in the 1.5 year, and so on. But we probably need to do that kind of research. Now, what do we call that kind of research? What's the label? Who remembers? That's the research design. Anybody remember? That's right. Intensive burst. That's the word. Intensive measurement burst. Right? So, in the future research or future researchers need to try to design such research so that the various time scale phenomena that occur at different time scale, like different, can say, frequency or regularity, right, could be related or associated. Then we can really find the relations between, say, quick changing events and longer term changing events and far longer term changing events. Clear so far? No questions? Alright, next. Here's a model, figure 14.2 in the text. This is a working model of how multiple time-scale inquiry could help understand socially interrelated nature of long-term development. So we have men and women, each of them experiences a problem, right? So these problems will give rise to perceived stress and reduction of cortisol in the body, right? And this problem obviously causes some, let's say, changes in feeling, so poor effect or low effect. Okay. Each of them individually, before the second, individually they will be affected, but we know that the other party also affects that person, right? Cortisol level, negative response. So that has been established. So this is what we call daily life dynamics. So this could be measured in research every day, right? Well, just take a blood culture every day, simply, and you can measure the change over time on a daily basis. Now, last week, if you recall, we mentioned C-reactive protein. We also remember we mentioned interleukin-6. Yes? Now, this has to do with metabolic health. Now, these do not change everything. Right? So these are what we call intermediate frequency varying or intermediate frequency variables. They vary not every day, but perhaps weeks. Right? So each of these men and women will experience changes in each of those indicators: inflammation indicators, metabolic health indicators. That also influence one's state could also influence the other. Then we have the longer term variables, or what we call distal. So distal means distance, longer term. Outcomes, as you know, health outcomes, well-being outcomes, and other outcomes. So usually that will be disease. Diabetes. How long does diabetes take to form? We don't really know, but it's not going to be so quickly as it did. Like you start to not exercise, smoke a lot, drink a lot of alcohol, and then within days you get diabetes. It's not going to be like that, unlikely. That's what at least researchers tend to believe. Right? It will take time, and it goes through at least changes in the metabolic health. Right? How about cardiovascular disease like stroke? Frailty, that means weakness, physical weakness. So we need research that could measure daily changes, as well as mostly weekly and monthly changes, as well as longer term changes. And we need this kind of research to also take data from both parties in the marital relationship. As you can imagine, this would be a fairly challenging piece of research to do, not just because of the time involved, but just the number of people involved. And we do know that people do fall out after time, right? The attrition, right? And these are older people, so we also expect that one of the reasons for attrition is death, right? Another possible reason, as you know, in the first week is simply cognitive decline, perhaps just difficulty in arriving or going to the say doctor's office or even to the research institute or center to be tested. So this is going to be a challenging piece. Nevertheless, this is going to be the kind of research design that we'll see where social interrelations in older adults are concerned in the future. So this is the feedback. Okay, we will also see in the future more focus on within couples. So earlier on, those research or evidence we discussed seem to suggest that within couples that collaborate, here are the outcomes. Within couples that do not collaborate, those are the outcomes. But how about just within a couple? That's what this slide says. But individual change trajectories seem to be more similar to the respective spouse than to randomly matched persons from the same sample I said earlier. Right? So in the future, specific conditions under which such spousal discrepancies that are adaptive or maladaptive will have to be investigated. In the textbook, this particular research that is presented is called HILDA, Household Income and Labor Dynamics in Australia, or HILDA in short. This research has pointed to substantial discrepancies in mental health of more than 3/4 of the standard deviation between partners within a given marriage diet that remains stable over 9 years. Okay, let's see if I can diagram that. No, I don't. Right. So what we are saying is that in the future, we would see research that investigates the differences within a diet. So now we have between diets, collaborate, non collaborate. We have diets that close marital relationship, not so. We have diets that use sentiment override or not. These are between. So kind of 2 groups, 3 groups, many between subjects. So within each diet there may be differences. This is where research will take place. It hasn't taken place yet. Alright. Impact on health outcomes is another area. Right? It makes sense to explore something as little as 5-minute hand massage by a spouse could reduce stress associated with medical procedures, especially invasive medical procedures. Why? It's because now we know that in the context of a romantic relationship, holding the hand of a romantic partner elevates stress in young couples. That has been shown already. Just holding the hand of a romantic partner, so couple, let's say spouse. We also know at the moment, right, that receiving a hand massage by a health professional before surgery actually reduces anxiety in cataract patients. Could we then kind of put these two findings together and ask the question regarding whether or not hand massage by a spouse prior to some medical procedure or perhaps even invasive medical procedure like surgery could reduce stress? We don't know. We could ask that question in the future. The other thing that spouses could help each other, research could uncover, would be whether spouses are good monitors of clinical symptoms of the partner. So, take for example dementia, whether due to Alzheimer's disease or due to vascular decline or stroke. Right? When you have a decline in, say, memory, working memory, it's quite unlikely that you will be cognizant of that. Usually, these people with Alzheimer's dementia are given feedback that they have. Say, place the umbrella in the refrigerator. They're given feedback. So, who gives them those feedback? The spouse. Somebody who lives with him or her, right? So, are these people who live with this spouse, who have suffered, say, Alzheimer's disease dementia, good monitors of different clinical symptoms? That is something that research has yet to find out. In the future, we hope to see more research in this area. Because many of these symptoms, the patient may not be at least immediately aware of the presence of those symptoms. And I think this is finally the next area. Finally, the next area that we'll see future research would be just taking what we know in married couples and going beyond. So at the moment, as I said when we began, marital diets are one type of social relation, or interrelation. There are many others. Right? The various familial relations, like parents, adult children, grandchildren, siblings, right? All these are all the other relations. Do all these various relations contain SOC model, for instance, selection, optimization, and compensation model? Could the SOC model be used to understand the relation between, say, adult children of older people? The relationship between adult children and of older people and older people. Could we use the SOC model to help us understand how older people relate to each other as siblings? So, say a 70-year-old man with another, say, 72-year-old man who is his brother, let's say, who may stay together. Could we use the SOC model, or do we have some other model to explain the kind of phenomenon between them? And obviously, what kind of phenomenon are we interested in? Once again, the same three: well-being, health, cognition. So we don't have much research in this area. Our research so far has just been focused predominantly just on married couples. It's convenient, one reason. Right? You ask a spouse, one party to participate, they ask that person, could you also volunteer your wife or your husband? Could you invite him? And so on. Right? So it may be easier for many practical reasons to conduct research in this area. Okay, the other areas would be caregivers. Now, former caregivers are what we call healthcare professionals. So nurses, health attendants, physiotherapists, occupational therapists, medical social workers, right? These are what we call formal caregivers. Informal caregivers are family members, spouses, or adult children usually, who take care of the older person at home without pay. So informal and formal, the difference is either paid or unpaid. So where does foreign domestic worker lie? In between. We don't have a clear distinction of that category yet, whether formal or informal, right? At the moment in Singapore, at least, it seems to lie more towards informal. So yes, they are paid a salary, right? However, may not be specifically for the care of a say stroke patient or dementia patient. So, and some of them may not be trained specifically for the kind of care that they are asked or they are engaged to provide. So we really can't be very certain where to place FTWs, so to speak. But nevertheless, formal and informal caregivers are essentially two types of caregivers. Now, how do caregivers relate? How do the caregivers say relate to or associate with a patient's well-being? So let's say if a caregiver feels caregiver burden, you must have read on that, right? Caregiver burden during the lockdown, during this pandemic period, we hear so many reports where healthcare workers, i.e., formal caregivers, as well as family members who take care of seniors, feel burnout, right? They report burnout, they report stress, they report burden. Many of them report depression, anxiety, sleep problems, right? You must have heard of that. Now, how do these adverse outcomes of these caregivers associate with the health outcomes of the patient? So, for instance, if a caregiver feels burnout or reports burnout, does it mean that the patient that he or she is taking care of tends to have, say, poorer functional ability, tends to take a longer time to recover or rehabilitate from, say, stroke? That's where research will go in the future. Clear? This next three slides are from the article, one of the articles I gave you. So and Pan, really this is NTU's research. Pan is Joyce Parker, one of our faculty in the psychology division. So what did they find? The title here is Moderated Mediation Model. So they started with spousal living arrangement, that means either staying together or staying apart. Spouse, whether they stay in the same bedroom, whether they sleep on the same bed, that is called living arrangement. Whether there are other people in the same house, right? Is related to loneliness. That's what they found. Okay. The closest, what we call closer living arrangements tend to reduce. They also found that living arrangements of a spouse affects mental health in old age. Okay. So they also found that loneliness is related to mental health. So you see the error. Now, what is interesting is this. When perceived problems in the spousal relationship occur, then we see that this spousal living arrangement is greatly, or you can say more strongly associated with it. So when we say, okay, you know what mediation is? Mediation means a certain variable goes through another variable to affect a third variable. So in our case, if I can just put here. So a mediation is spousal arrangement going through loneliness to influence mental. That's mediation. The mediator is loneliness. Right? You know that. So we can say that living arrangements influences mental health indirectly through loneliness. That's the mediation. Or we can also say that in this diagram, spousal living arrangement also directly influences mental health. So both direct and indirect relationship. The indirect part, where the so-called third variable, that's the mediator, right? Why moderated mediation? Now, that is really because of this perceived problem. So what is, we are saying, this model of four variables, we have the mediator there, right? But we also have the moderator or interaction variable. So take ANOVA, right? So perceived problems and spousal living arrangement essentially interact. So you take a score here, take a score and multiply. Right? You take ANOVA, HP 2100. And that affects the score, essentially. So that's the moderator. So in this model, we have both a mediator and a moderator. Of what? Of the relationship between living arrangement and okay? Okay? Right. So that's the model that has been found to be supported by So and Ham, published in 2019. Okay, let's see. Now, they also found that perceived problems also moderate the other relationship. The arrow that goes from loneliness to mental health. So perceived problems doesn't just interact with spousal living arrangements, but it also interacts with loneliness, both of which contribute to the score on elderly. Okay? So perceived problems really is a moderator in two ways in this model. What they call moderated hypermediation model. Now, how does it happen? So this line, right, in your article you see this line. When there is an absence of perceived problems, right, the relationship between loneliness on the x-axis and mental health score on the y-axis, it's somewhat like that. See a slope here. So, well, yes, the greater the loneliness, the smaller or the lower the mental health, poorer, right? That is absence of. So no perceived problems among spouses. Now, if there are perceived problems, then you see that this line is sharp. Right? That means with the presence of perceived problems, whether those are real problems, objectively real problems or not, doesn't matter, but perceived problems. You see that the relationship between loneliness and mental health is stronger, right? As exemplified by this gradient, steeper slope. Greater loneliness is associated with much poorer mental health. This is essentially what they found, which is quite cutting edge because this is unshakable support evidence to say that in a spousal relationship, whether or not there are perceived problems makes a big difference where loneliness is concerned. Where loneliness and mental health, whether associated between loneliness and mental health. We used to think that problems can affect one's mental health, wholeheartedly. Right? We used to think that problems or perceived problems will affect one's loneliness, make you feel more alone. Because you are the only one, say, struggling with a certain problem or perceived problem. Right? But now, researchers have found, right, in our department, that perceived problems not only affect those two individually, but affect the relationship between those two. So we are almost saying if you have less perceived problems or no perceived problems, then it's not going to be a very strong relationship between those two. If you have more perceived problems, it's going to be an aggravating factor. So that's essentially what has been found, which contributes right now to the theme. Okay, I've come to the end of the slide. Show any questions? Yes. Yes.
Seems to arise from the need of compensation because physical activity is associated with aging-related decline too. And then if you look another way around, to compensate at the same time is to optimize current levels of health.
Right. Okay, let me turn to help me understand. Turn to the slide on the SOC, right? Your question is on the SOC model. The question is whether the C is related to O. Is there a purpose to set boundary? Is there a need to differentiate between O and C? Okay, right? In that context, I can see where you're coming from because it seems like they are related, right? It seems like they are kind of two sides of the same thing. Is that what you're saying? I'm just trying to put it later. It seems to be two sides of the same thing. Well, to establish, we need research. My answer is we need research to establish that. So we don't know. The answer is we don't know. Researchers haven't found the answer. It's an empirical question. Good question. It's an empirical question that will have impact on this theory, whether this theory is supported or not. Right? It will further this theory if, say, researchers could find via designing a questionnaire or via some behavioral observation observation of behavior, that O is essentially of the same dimension as C. So they would probably need to come up with questions, let's say questionnaire research, right, that measures O and measures C, that is theoretically on the same continuum. We don't know whether that's true yet. Then they can either support or refute this theory, or at least they could then give rise to what we say, to clarity of whether or not the two are dimensionally different or exist on the same dimension. But at the moment, Box and his colleagues, right, are saying that, are positing that they are different mechanisms. So optimization is optimization, compensation is compensation. Right? So there's no evidence to suggest at the moment that they belong to the same. Right? But yes, there is possibly one direction of research that could be done to support the theory or refute the theory. Good one. Other questions? No? Okay, if no questions, we take a short break, let's say 10 minutes, be back by 5, and the organizing team get ready to start the debates. I encourage you to put up your names, and put up your names, and organizing team, could you come to me just for a brief moment?